Hey, welcome into a special bonus episode of Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange. Today, I'm joined by Josh Jordan. You can follow Josh's work daily on sportsmap.com and follow him on X at JoshJordan975. Show support for the hometown guys in orange by hitting like on this video right now, and you can support our drive to 25 by subscribing to the channel and helping us get one step closer to 25,000 subs. We appreciate everyone who has subscribed to us so far. And even if you haven't subscribed and you watch regularly, which we know there's plenty of those who you do, we appreciate you too. We invite you to subscribe right now. This channel cannot exist without your support, and we like doing this, so please hit subscribe. Josh, I want to talk to you today about Joe Espada because I think it's probably more timely than ever. I'm seeing a lot of bullets aimed at Joe Espada right now on social media, in our comments section, because the team is off to, one of their historically worst starts. And it's, due to a lot of things, not the least of which is depth problems in the rotation because of injuries and performance problems because of guys you really counted on in this lineup that are just not producing. So I say all that because I don't know that there's any one thing to point at. I feel strongly that if there were, it's not Joe Espada. And maybe I'm conflating blame. Maybe people aren't blaming all of this on Espada, but I do feel like he and to another extent, Jose Abreu seem to be the absolute lightning rods for the condition of this team right now, because I think people need to assign blame. The major thing that is different is that Dusty's gone. There was a thought of once Dusty is gone, they'll put somebody in place who doesn't do all these crazy things with this lineup. Well, there have been some questionable things that have happened with the lineup. Alex Bregman's treatment in the lineup has been one of those things. He's been bad for most of the season. People were asking, why does he not get dropped? He finally gets dropped, does well for a couple of games, gets pushed back up in the lineup, and then does poorly again. And so finally in the Mariners series, we saw him dropped back down again. Ends up getting a 2-run home run. I think that's correlation, not causation necessarily. But, Joey Loperfido is another example where Joey Loperfido gets called up. And then Dana Brown says, well, we're bringing him up to play. We're not bringing him up to sit. And then he sits for a week and against a slew of right-handed pitching and no real explanation given. And then he gets sent back down because of Jose Abreu's return. That's not Espada's fault, but it certainly doesn't do him any favors because it's one less thing, one less tool in the lineup. But Josh, I want to ask you, I want to get your opinion on this. Where are you with Jose or Joe Espada's managing for the first third of the 2024 season for the Astros?
Well, I mean, obviously the record's not what you would like it to be. That's certainly the case. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which you got into a few of them there. I see a lot of stuff on social media. I wish he'd be a little more fiery. People wanted him to get ejected in the Mariners series the other day when that ball got called fair and then called foul, and then or it was the other way around, and it ended up being a foul ball, which was the right call. But people were upset that Espada didn't go argue it because it could have cost the team. But it ended up not costing the team because they put a couple runs on the board that inning. But that's the kind of stuff I hear about Espada is, I want to see him freak out and get thrown out of games and that kind of stuff. And that's fine. If you think that would make a difference, cool. But I'm looking at the pitching and going like, man, they're 26th in ERA. They're 27th in WHIP. So as much as we want to be upset about shuffling Bregman around in the batting order and the problems with Abreu, that's fine. But we also have to look at the pitching, and we can put some of that on injuries. But, I mean, is it all injuries? Ryan Presley has declined, and Hader started off the season really poorly. So did Brian Abreu. Not everything you can blame on injuries. The starting part of the rotation, sure, there's some of that. But I think the real question is here, let me dial it all down to this. This is what people are asking. Is this really Espada's decisions that are getting made in a lot of these circumstances? Or is this stuff coming up from, from Dana Brown, from Jim Crane, from Bagwell? How many of these choices are really his to make?
Yeah.
And we don't know any of that.
Right.
We've seen organizations run like that in the past. I remember with the Texans back in the day, oh, is this Bill O'Brien or is this Easterby or is this, coming from ownership? Who really drafted JJ Watt? A lot of times these organizations like to muddy the water so you can't really point a finger and assign blame at anybody. But Dana Brown just spoke on the flagship about that. He was asked, like, how do you think Joe has done as your manager? And he was like, I think he's done fine. Him and I are in conversations every day. They're talking every day. This was a guy that didn't have experience. I kind of think Dana wanted a yes man type manager that he thought would also do a good job, that knew the ball club. And he has that. But that also makes it hard to blame all the stuff that goes poorly on Espada, because is this Bagwell making Abreu play now? Is this Jim Crane? The timing of them doing this, the Astros were actually starting to play well. They were building some momentum coming into this Mariners series, the biggest series of the season so far. And then he gets forced to deal with Abreu back in the lineup. But then at the same time, he puts Singleton in there with Abreu, which makes me kind of second guess him. I'm like, is this really the best lineup that you could put out there with, Dubon's hit well with guys in runners in scoring position. And they gave you this narrative like, well, Abreu can't show you, he can't hit his way out of this if we don't play him. Well, where's that energy for Chas McCormick and for Dubon? McCormick's done more for this organization than Abreu ever had. Not a lot, but more. And who knows with him? Is he really healthy? That's the big problem, Brandon, is they don't tell you the truth very much. So it gets very hard to believe them when they tell you anything, and it makes it hard to assign blame.
Yeah, and it is tough to decipher what's really going on because we don't know what the decision, we're not privy to what the decision-making process is behind the scenes. But all we can judge on is based on the context clues of what we see. There is no one outwardly advocating for Dubon to play more, for Chas McCormick to play more, but there are definitely people advocating for Jose Abreu to play more, and we're getting updates about what Jose Abreu is doing, or more appropriately not doing, when he gets sent down. And there's no rhyme or reason that's given to the city or the media of why it was now that he's brought back. And so we're all left to guess. And so we fill in the blanks ourselves with our own thoughts and biases and whatever the case is. But I want to get back to something you said, because you talked about energy. About keeping that same energy. Dusty took the same bullets last season about not being fiery. Maybe they'd call him Pawpaw Dusty's asleep on the bench. Like, here's an ump out here calling strikes a foot off the plate, and Dusty won't argue for his guys. Oh, Dusty won't argue. And so I think it's fair that if you had that complaint about Dusty, that you have that same complaint about Joe. I'm with you. I don't know that helps matters any. I think that's more of a people like to see that kind of the Carlos Correa mound visit thing. It's like it's a thing that has taken a life of its own. It's a feel good kind of thing for the fans. I don't know how productive that actually is, but it's a narrative. And so the thing that I see in when people are critiquing a spot, at least sometimes, is they say, you railed Dusty last season for playing Jose Abreu in the cleanup spot for as long as you did. It's only fair that you railed Joe Espada for playing Alex Bregman in the cleanup position for as long, because you kind of keep the same energy. Where do you come out on that?
I find that really funny, actually, because Pena was a guy where Dusty moved him all over the lineup last year. Abreu was a guy that he insisted hit in the middle of the lineup for the most of the season. And I think Espada, he's reacted. He's said, well, this isn't really working. Let's try something else. And it's funny. Everybody complained about Jordan hitting second all year at the beginning of the season. And then they move him in the lineup and he's not really hitting any better. What does he have? 2 home runs in May. So we look at all the lineup stuff, and I get that people are frustrated because you keep seeing guys like Bregman come up with guys on base and hit a weak pop up, or you see Abreu seemingly come up every time there's a big situation on the line and he strikes out on 3 pitches. At the end of the day, they got to get it done. But I mean, their batting average is first in all of baseball. So they're hitting. I think they're like 10th or something in runs scored. So it's been the same narrative the whole year. And it's when the pitching's good, the bats don't come through. You know, Hunter Brown comes out, throws you a gem against the Mariners. They can't come through and hold it with the bullpen, and they struggle to score any more runs. You know, you don't get that one. Before that, Hunter Brown had a quality start. They weren't able to win that game. I don't think they've won a single game where Hunter Brown has had a quality start. So that's part of it. But overall, I think Espada is doing okay. If I'm going to look at coaching, I want to look at the coaching of the pitchers. I mean, they are terrible. I hit it on earlier, like 27th in whip. I mean, they're at the very bottom of the league. That's where I would look around and be like, why are we walking the 9-hole hitter? You know, why to allow these better hitters to come up in these situations? Why does this happen so often? I mean, especially against the Yankees. I don't know how many times it felt like they walked a guy to face Soto. So I think a lot of it's on the player performance, but I'm also kind of, they used to be a stat-driven organization, analytics. I don't feel like they are so much anymore. I feel like they only use it for their own benefit. You know, I heard Dana Brown on the flagship, you know, talking about the choice of why now to bring up Abreu and, you know, what was the decision? He's like, oh, you know, he went down to Florida for a few weeks and, he looked good. Had he OPS over 800 or 900. Okay, but let's look at that really. Okay, well, he was down there for a few weeks, right? But in Florida, he only played in 5 games. What did he do in those games? 1 for 5, 1 for 5, 1 for 5, 3 for 5, good, and 1 for 4. So you're going to give me his OPS was this or whatever, but only 1 game was he not pretty bad. Now, he did have 1 home run and a couple doubles, fine. But overall, if you say I went 1 for 5 in a game, that's not a good day at the ballpark. And he's doing that seemingly every performance. And that was against 18-year-olds. And then he goes to Sugarland and he has 2 games and he doesn't collect a hit. If you want to say Abreu's ready to come back, then give us some evidence that he looks ready. It feels like they decided ahead of time that he was coming back now, right. Which also makes me wonder, didn't the Astros have a calendar? We're going to decide that this is the date he needs to be back and playing for the team against the Mariners when you're finally making up ground. Now, they didn't know that at the time, but they did know that that's an elite pitching staff that they were having to deal with. They knew it was a division opponent, and they knew that they were in a bad spot. They didn't have a good record. They knew those games would mean a lot, and yet they decided that was the time Abreu had to come back, and if we're going to bring him back, he has to play, or how are we going to know if he turned things around? And that's what I mentioned earlier. Well, why doesn't McCormick have to play? Why doesn't Dubon have to play? Why didn't Loperfido have to play? It seems to be all for this one guy. And if I'm just a fan and I get upset and I see the stuff on social media, if I'm a player and we're starting to get some momentum and climb out of this thing and they put Abreu back in now, like why now? I feel kind of bad for Abreu actually, because this isn't exactly, he doesn't want to go up there and not perform, but right. When you see it on defense too, he just looks so slow when balls are going past him, and the suddenness just looks gone and the confidence is shot. I just feel like on both sides of the ball, he's really hurting you. And just with the energy of the team,
yes,
I just don't see how this gets any better. And I will say this quickly. Dana Brown said that like it's in sight whether this experiment's going to work or not. So at least it makes you wonder, what is that timetable exactly?
Well, and they'll never tell us that. Yeah. That's the problem here, is that there is a giant transparency issue. Also, to your point about this being a data-driven team, if there was ever a quote that encapsulated the new direction of this team, it's Dana Brown in reference to Jose Abreu saying it's not about the results. It's about how he feels on the swing. And look, I don't mean to be that guy. I'm not trying to be pedantic here, but wins and losses aren't decided on vibes. It's based on production. And also, if you're so concerned about vibes, I go back to what you just said, Josh. How does the team feel about vibes? How does that feel? When you bring in a guy who hasn't shown, and look, I'm sure to a man, those guys love Jose Abreu. Jose Abreu seems like a really cool dude. I feel very bad for him right now, that as bad as you can feel for a millionaire, but I feel very bad for him that he's going through this right now. This is not how he wants to end his career. This is not the position he wants to be put in as a player. It's an impossible thing. He's not going to volunteer to stop playing. That's not going to be, because those guys don't get to this level by being quitters and just stopping. So he's not going to be the one to call it quits. Someone's going to have to tell him that it's over for him. But the problem is that there is a lot of money tied up into this, and that makes the stakes higher. That makes it a lot harder to call it quits. If this guy was just, if his name was Joey Loperfido, or if his name was, I don't even know, Justin Dearden, you know what I mean? Like, we already saw what would happen. You saw when Justin Dearden hits 180, you're done, bud. Like, you wash out of the minors, much less like what you do, much less get up to the big club. So, and I'm not against, like, there's a sunken cost fallacy thing. I get that. Like, you don't want to spend too much time, but you also don't want to completely give up on an asset unless you know for sure that it is completely cooked, right? Like, you don't want to give up on Abreu unless you know he's done. But to your point, bring him back in a situation that's more conducive to positivity and production. Don't bring him back against the hardest team in the league. And there's going to be people, because I've seen them. I've seen people on social media say, well, just because he gets reactivated and brought back up to the line, that doesn't mean Joe Espada has to play him. Oh, it doesn't? Oh, it doesn't? You don't think Joe Espada is going to feel pressure to play this guy when, in spite of all the results, he's being put back on the team? To your point, there's nothing production-wise where you can point to and go, well, this shows it. He's ready. Like, this guy's knocking the cover off the ball. Like, he has to get called up. He's like, his production's not pushing him to bring back on the team. What's being pushed, the narrative that's pushing him back on this team, is that there's some guys that are going to have egg on their face because of this decision, because the contract that was given to him and the lack of production that has accompanied that. So I don't buy it. I'm sorry, man. Like, there's nothing, again, like, and I want to get back to your point. You mentioned the lineup with John Singleton and Abreu. You're like, okay, like, if you feel pressured to play Abreu, then you don't have to have Singleton in the same lineup. I agree. But, and I'm just going to say, but John Singleton has done everything you've asked him to do. He's produced more than he has ever in his career. And look, is this about feel good? I just said it's not about vibes. I get that. But John Singleton is producing to the level of a big leaguer right now. He's not a great big leaguer. He's not even a good big leaguer, but he is around average, an average big leaguer, which he's never been able to do before. You brought him in and he's done everything you've asked of him. He's working good quality professional at bats, and you're going to bench him for Jose Abreu. And again, this is nothing personal against Jose Abreu. We're just talking about production, but Jose Abreu has looked absolutely lost at the plate, and his defense hasn't been there. John Singleton has played a very competent first base for you defensively, and he's done a very competent, serviceable job with the bat in his hand. So I think if you're trying to hold up any sort of level of credibility and you're Jose or you're Joe Espada and you're trying to run this team and you're trying to say, like, hey, if you're produce, you're going to get play, that's a real hard thing to sell when you're John Singleton and you're, hitting 220 something and, are working walks. And then a guy who's hitting 99, and I know he's over 100 now because he got the hit in game one, but you bring in Abreu and Abreu is producing less. I just think as a Espada, that's an impossible situation that you put him in.
Well, it is. And think how slow they've been to react to the problem at first base. Like, they don't want to hear it. Like, how long on these podcasts we've been like, get Dubon over there. The guy could play shortstop. He could play first base if you need him to. Oh, and then they ask him, like, is it going to be, is Singleton still your first baseman? Is Abreu your first baseman? And they're like, oh, well, we're not going to commit to that. But, it's not Abreu right now, yet he goes right in to play first base.
Right.
And then you still play Singleton, I guess, just to give him hey, sorry about this, but we're going to still keep playing you. but it doesn't make sense because Dubon would be a better option. And I keep going back to Chas McCormick. I know he hasn't done anything this year. I know he's been hurt, but the same argument to him, he's not going to get any better if you don't play him. And if he's at least proven to be, he was better than George Springer last year. Now, I know Springer's starting to decline a little bit, but Chas was a very good baseball player last year. And even the year before, he's done some good things for you. But I look at what they're doing, and they want Abreu to come out of this, even though it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. And I can't, it's all speculation, but what are we left with? They don't really tell us anything. I think this is a Jim Crane and a Jeff Bagwell deal. I think that they are going to do everything they can. They are willing to sacrifice possibly the season to see if they can get this Abreu thing corrected. I don't get it. I mean, it's not my money. I guess that's why I don't get it. But look, this stuff happens in sports all the time. Like, look at McCullers. You give him that big deal, and he hurts his elbow and his forearm, and he misses a whole bunch of time. Verlander, you gave him that big deal, and he had Tommy John surgery. So, that's just part of the risk of doing business. And this guy is, what is he, 37 now? And the eye test, he looks slow. I just don't see that he's going to bounce back, where a guy that's younger like Dubon or McCormick, they might actually get better as ball players. So, look, it's frustrating to watch. We know what's going on. Kind of for Dana Brown, I wonder if he knew this is how this was going to be when he came down here, to where it sounds like he just kind of answers to Bagwell and Crane. And then he has to be the one to tell Espada, like, hey, this is what we have to do. But I'll tell you this is really shaping up. And I don't, it's purely a guess, but I wonder if the back in their minds with Jeff Bagwell and Jim Crane, if they're like, if we run this thing into the ditch with the Abreu and the season never turns around, do they already know, like, Espada's our fall guy? We'll be able to just wash this all away and tell, because all the fan base wants Espada's head anyway. If you go on social media, they're saying some terrible things about Joe Espada and what they think of him as a manager. So if the fan base is already kind of leaning that way, then I almost feel like it's a get out of jail free card for Crane and Bagwell. They can just blame it all on him and roll into next season and be like, we corrected the problem.
Yeah. And look, I want to be very, very clear too. This season is not on Jose Abreu to save. No. Like this, and when it's all said and done, if this season, if the Astros miss the playoffs this year, it's not going to be due to Jose Abreu. That's not what. And quite frankly, as much as we are trying to assign influence or blame in this situation, and ultimately, as we've said on this podcast before, and I think strongly that Crane would agree with the statement or the sentiment that the buck stops with him.
Yeah.
So I think Crane would take responsibility and say, like, hey, ultimately I'm in charge of the results, and the condition that they're in is not Crane's fault singularly either. Crane didn't go hurt those guys. He didn't go rip the ligaments out of Jose Urquidy's arm and Javier. And look, there's some things that are happening that are out of the control of Jim Crane and everyone right now. It's sports. This isn't business, because like in business, you can't account for things like that. And in business, like you can project markets and kind of fluctuating. Sometimes things happen, but in business, there's also not as much reliant upon guys being in slumps or having good chemistry with their teammates or things like that. So I don't think this is an indictment necessarily on Jim Crane, but I also think he's not helping the matter. And certainly the lack of transparency is damning, because we can only assume things at this point, and maybe wrong, but there's a lot of things that indicate that our assumptions are on the right track. Again, we don't know what the power structure is. We don't know how much influence Dana Brown has. But what we do know is that historically, Dana Brown's been a pretty competent front office, personnel member. And he comes over here and all of a sudden now he's like cherry picking stats for why you bring Jose Abreu back on the team. That just sounds like a guy that's covering. That doesn't sound like a guy who believes in what he's saying. He sounds like he's trying to speak as positively as he can about a situation that doesn't feel like it's entirely in his control. Sounds like he's just laying cover fire for some more bad decisions. And so I say all that because I don't want to say this is all Jim Crane's fault, because it's not.
No.
But what I'm saying is that when you're not transparent and you also make bad decisions and everything seems to unilaterally report up to Jim Crane, then he is, I think, deserving of some of the bullets here, because if in the absence of evidence that tells you otherwise, that's where the blame's going to go, when in a guy who has said the buck stops with him, and a guy who has said under his ownership, the window will always be open. And I think we're about to enter the find out of that statement right now.
We are. That's what worries me, is it feels like they're in a little bit of denial of where they are right now. I mean, they're 24-31. You're now 5.5 games behind the Mariners. So for them to pick this series to bring back Abreu, when you told us he'd probably come back as a platoon guy, the Mariners have maybe the best pitching staff in baseball. You could argue that. All these right-handed starters, that's if you're platooning, Abreu shouldn't be hitting against those. That should be Singleton in there. Yeah. So I just don't understand we're going to go play him on the road because they're afraid that he's going to get booed when they start him, when they come back home to start this next series. He's not playing well in Seattle. Why would they not boo him when they come back here if he doesn't play well in Seattle? And I don't think anybody should boo him or anything like that. Either. It's just, that's what we're hearing.
Yeah.
And I don't hearing that might be some of the logic of why the timing of this stuff happened. So we're just addressing it.
Yeah.
I don't think they should boo him, but I wouldn't be surprised. And the reason why is Astros fans don't feel like he has deserved the opportunities that he's getting right now.
That's it.
And that they're not keeping their eye on. This is not a typical Astros season. They're going to have to win at a crazy big clip to get to 90 wins at this point. And this was your one chance to, like, hey, maybe we won't have a great record, but maybe we can win our division. This was your chance to get closer to the Mariners. And now you got JV taking the mound, just trying to get a series split at best. Yeah. So it's really hard to watch right now. Obviously they don't have the answers or they would do it. And, Dana Brown said that, it's not looking good for Urquidy, at least because of this setback. I wouldn't expect him in the next month or two. I mean, of course not. This is a setback after he was already hurt. And for them, they're delaying that, to hear what the results of the MRI are with, Javier. That's not a good sign. He said they're looking at second opinions. So it doesn't look like any help's coming. JP France, we know, is hurt. Yeah. And they dealt Belak for basically nothing. Yeah. And I get it. There was a roster crunch at the time. But, man, looking at all these injuries, you could have used a Belak just to, he was at least serviceable last year. I don't think he's good. But when you just need somebody for innings, this could be a crunch here. They're in a tough spot, man. Let's just hope they get it going here in Seattle, at least split the series. Because if they get swept, man, do you even think they can climb out of this if they create that much separation between themselves and the Mariners? I mean, the Rangers aren't playing great.
No.
And it's funny. Do we hear stuff about firing Bruce Bochy because they're under 500? Not really.
No, because they've got injuries and they're also not even a full season removed from winning a chip. So they're still going to be, they're going to give Bochy the benefit of the doubt here. And everything was set up for you. You asked me, do I think they can, if they fall 7.5 games back of Seattle, which obviously could happen, regardless of whether they win the series or split the series or not, they could still fall 7.5 games back regardless. I think it's possible. I think it's unlikely. And going back to your other point, and I guess we can end it on this. Going back to your other point, you said like you feel like they are willing to try this Abreu experiment and run it into the ground. And, like, if you feel like it's a lost season anyway, then what does it hurt to see what you have in Abreu? No. My sentiment is, I don't agree with that. My sentiment would go the opposite. Is, if it is a lost season, it's much more important to you that you find out what you have with Joey Loperfido, because that guy could be the future of your team. But especially if you need to make decisions on whether or not you can deal or should deal Kyle Tucker, if you don't think you're going to be able to retain him. And I don't know anything about the process. There's nothing that says Kyle Tucker is going to get handed the size of a check that he's going to dictate once he's a free agent. There's no indications that there's any conversations, right? Well, we know the opposite is true. Dana Brown has said they have not talked to him about a contract extension. So we know there hasn't even been an offer made. And so ultimately, there's nothing historically that would indicate that there's an offer that's going to be given to him that's going to be anywhere in the ballpark of what this man wants or deserves. So it's much more imperative that you figure out what Joey Loperfido is now. Figure out now, because you may, depending on where you're at in September, you may be needing to deal with Kyle Tucker to retool, to get some prospects back. No one wants to hear that. I don't want to say it. I don't want to deal Kyle Tucker. I want to give Kyle Tucker the contract. It's not my money. So that's where I'm at with this. I think the more time you waste with Jose Abreu, like I think there's enough of a sample size, and more importantly, the man's age is a big indicator. It's not just the production. It's about age plus production. Plus, you need to figure out what the future of this organization is now, sooner than later.
And to your point, maybe that's why Loperfido's not playing exclusively at first base in the minor leagues. Maybe they do know that he might have to replace an outfielder if Tucker's gone. I don't know if Loperfido would play right field or not. That's, who knows? He can kind of play all over the place out there, but maybe that's why they're still playing him in the outfield, because in the big picture, maybe that's where they really see him.
Yeah. And look, the truth of the matter is that you're going to have to make decisions at first base and third base. So the corners, you're going to have to make big decisions on. We had a pretty good idea that you were going to lose Bregman after this season. You didn't realize you were going to basically lose Alex Bregman in season. And I mean, lose as in this man has lost his swing and has lost who we know as a recognizable Alex Bregman to be. He's just not that guy right now. And he has we have every reason to think that he'll eventually find it. Same with Yordan. I know this is not who Yordan Alvarez is. He's just going through it right now. That's not on anybody. It's not on Joe Espada to fix. I would love to see something from, the pitching coaches and the hitting coaches. I'd love to see something, out of them to just see that they're working on it and that they're trying to fix this. But again, it's you can't blame the coaches either. At the end of the day, you can only give so many. These guys are pros. You can only give so many tips. It's incumbent upon them to actually produce at the plate. And if they don't, there's nothing that Joe Espada can do, and there's nothing that Jim Crane can do. It's just, but what Dana Brown can do, what Jim Crane can do, is construct a roster that has more options on it than the current one does. And that's where, if we don't see, some significant changes in the offseason, I mean, that's just assuming that, this year's I don't know what you can do this year to make significant changes. Quite frankly, you're kind of locked into what you have. But if you don't see significant changes in the offseason, this team is going to be in real peril of just being a bad team going forward, or just being a mediocre team going forward. So I think we'll leave it there. Hey, yay! Like, what? On a bright
note. On that note. Woo.
Yeah, but I just wanted to have this conversation with you because I've seen so many bullets pointed towards Joe Espada. And I don't think it's fair. Again, I think there's plenty of things that we can critique him on, but I don't think any one person, including Jose Abreu, guys, don't boo Jose Abreu. Don't do that.
That doesn't help it. That doesn't
no, it's not going to help. This man has been a very good player in this league. It just did not work out for him here, or at least it hasn't to this point. Just don't do that. Like, just, that's, he does not deserve it. He is not the reason why this team is struggling the way they are. Again, we can be critical, but there's no reason to boo. Like, seriously, that's just uncalled for. Don't do it. Please, 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 please. Take the high road. And we're going to take the road that's out of here. We appreciate everybody watching us today. Appreciate having Josh back. Hello, Josh. Good to have you back. And we'll get all three of us back. The Avengers will reunite on Monday for next episode of Stone Cold Stros for episode 17 of season 2. So, and until then, fingers crossed, go Stros.